The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Sweetwater Creek, Montana Territory, 1876, as Katherine Langley crouched behind an overturned wagon, clutching her bleeding arm. The stagecoach robbery had gone terribly wrong, not that she'd been part of it, but being the sole survivor made little difference to anyone who might find her. She was a woman alone in the wilderness, miles from the nearest town, with night falling fast and wolves howling in the distance. Katherine tore a strip from her petticoat and tied it around her wound, wincing at the pain. The bullet had only grazed her, but it stung fiercely. Her long auburn hair had come loose from its pins during the attack, and she pushed it from her face with a trembling hand. Just 22 years old, and she'd already seen more violence and heartache than most people twice her age. "I should have stayed in Boston," she whispered to herself, though she knew there was nothing left for her there either. Not since her father's gambling debts had cost them everything, and his subsequent suicide had left her name tarnished beyond repair. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Someone was approaching. Friend or foe, she couldn't say, but in her experience, lone women in the territories rarely encountered the former. Katherine pressed herself against the wagon, holding her breath. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped altogether. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Anyone alive out here?" She remained silent, her heart pounding. "I ain't looking for trouble," the voice continued. "Just saw the smoke from the road. If you're hurt, I can help." Katherine weighed her options. Death by bullet or death by elements, neither seemed particularly appealing. Gathering her courage, she spoke. "I'm here," she said, her voice cracking. Behind the wagon, heavy boots crunched on the rocky ground, and a tall figure appeared around the edge of the overturned coach. He was broad-shouldered and sun-bronzed, with a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. A gun belt hung at his hip, but his revolver remained holstered. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. "You're hurt," he observed, kneeling beside her to examine her arm. "It's nothing," Katherine said, though she couldn't stop the small gasp of pain when he gently moved the makeshift bandage. "It needs cleaning or it'll fester. Name's Flynn Garrett." He offered her a canteen of water. "What happened here?" Katherine took a small sip before answering. "Robbers. They attacked the coach, killed everyone else. I only survived because I was thrown clear when the horses bolted." Flynn surveyed the grisly scene around them. 3 bodies lay in the dirt, including the driver and guard. "You heading somewhere particular, miss?" "Langley, Katherine Langley." "And no, not really." She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I was going west, that's all." Flynn nodded, not pressing further. "Well, Miss Langley, we need to get you someplace safe before nightfall. My camp's about an hour's ride from here. I've got supplies to tend that wound properly." Katherine hesitated. Going anywhere with a stranger was risky, but staying alone in the wilderness was certain death. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Flynn shrugged. "Because it's the right thing to do." He stood and held out his hand. "Unless you've got a better plan." She didn't. Reluctantly, she took his hand and let him help her to her feet. The world spun momentarily, and she stumbled against his chest. His strong arm steadied her. "Sorry," she murmured. "I'm a bit light-headed." "Blood loss will do that," he said. "Think you can ride?" Before she could answer, he whistled sharply, and a magnificent chestnut gelding trotted over. The horse nudged Flynn's shoulder affectionately. "This is Rusty," Flynn said, patting the horse's neck. "He's gentle enough. I'll help you up." Before Katherine could protest, Flynn's hands were at her waist, lifting her into the saddle. She bit back a cry as her injured arm was jostled. Flynn gathered the reins of his horse, then went to check the bodies of the fallen men. "What are you doing?" Katherine asked, alarmed. "Seeing if there's anything worth salvaging and checking for identification. Families deserve to know what happened to their kin." He searched each man efficiently, taking letters and personal effects but leaving valuables. After retrieving a small chest from the coach, he returned to Katherine. "These will need to be turned in to the marshal in Silver Creek," he explained, securing everything in his saddlebags. "We can head there tomorrow after you've rested." He swung up behind her in the saddle, his chest warm against her back. Katherine stiffened at the proximity, but there was nowhere else to go. Flynn reached around her to take the reins, creating a secure circle with his arms. "Relax," he said, his breath warm against her ear. I don't bite." As they rode away from the massacre site, Katherine found herself leaning back against him, exhaustion overtaking her wariness. The rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid presence of the cowboy behind her lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. "Why were you out here alone?" she asked after a while, wanting to stay alert. "I'm a scout for the Army," Flynn explained. "Just finished guiding a unit to Fort Benson and was heading back to Silver Creek." "You're not a soldier." "Used to be, not anymore." His tone discouraged further questions on that subject. "What about you? What's a Boston lady doing heading west on her own?" Katherine tensed. "How did you know I'm from Boston? Your accent, and your clothes are Eastern made. Fine quality too," she sighed. There was no point in lying. "I had to leave, there was trouble." There usually is when folks head west with no particular destination in mind. "My father died," she said after a long pause. "There were debts, many debts, and men who thought I should pay them in ways no lady would consider." Flynn's arms tightened slightly around her, a protective gesture that caught her by surprise. "Well, you're safe now," he said simply. Katherine almost laughed at that. Safe, she hadn't felt safe in months, but something about Flynn Garrett's quiet confidence made her want to believe him. They reached his campsite just as the last light was fading from the sky. It was a small clearing near a stream, with a lean-to shelter already constructed. Flynn helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Let me tend that arm," he said, guiding her to sit on a fallen log while he built up the fire. Katherine watched as he moved about the camp with practiced efficiency, heating water and preparing bandages from a medical kit. When he knelt before her and began cleaning her wound, his touch was surprisingly gentle for such large, calloused hands. "How did you learn to do this?" she asked, wincing as he applied a stinging salve. 4 years in the Union Army teaches a man a few things," he replied. "Hold still now." As he worked, Katherine studied his face in the firelight. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and intelligent gray eyes. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar. She guessed him to be in his early 30s. "There," he said, finishing the bandage. "Keep it clean, and it should heal fine." "Thank you," Katherine said softly. Flynn nodded and moved away to prepare a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and distant coyote calls the only sounds. "You should get some rest," Flynn said when they'd finished eating. "Take the lean-to, I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly. You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "You're injured and exhausted. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count." Too tired to argue, Katherine retreated to the small shelter. Flynn had laid out a bedroll inside, and despite its simplicity, it looked more inviting than anything she'd seen in days. She settled in, listening to the sounds of Flynn moving around the camp, securing things for the night. "Flynn." She called softly. "Yes, Miss Langley, thank you for everything." There was a pause. "Get some rest, Katherine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice followed her into sleep. Katherine woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, wincing at the pain in her arm. Outside the lean-to, Flynn was cooking breakfast over a fresh fire. He looked up as she emerged, hair tousled and dress wrinkled. "Morning," he said. "How's the arm?" "Sore but better," she replied, attempting to smooth her hair with her good hand. "Is there somewhere I might freshen up?" Flynn pointed to the stream. "It's private enough around that bend, I'll keep my back turned." Katherine gathered her dignity and made her way to the stream. The cold water was refreshing against her skin, and she did her best to make herself presentable. When she returned to camp, Flynn handed her a tin plate of food without comment. "We should reach Silver Creek by mid-afternoon," he said as they ate. "The marshal there is a good man. He'll handle the matter of the stagecoach attack." "And what then?" Katherine asked quietly. Flynn regarded her thoughtfully. "That depends on where you're heading." "I told you I don't have a destination." "Everyone's heading somewhere, Katherine." She set down her plate, frustration welling up inside her. "No, they don't. Some people are just running. Some people have nowhere to belong." Flynn's expression softened. "There's always somewhere to belong." You just haven't found it yet. Katherine shook her head, tears threatening. You don't understand. I've lost everything: my home, my family, my reputation. I'm alone in the world with nothing but the clothes on my back. You've got more than that, Flynn said firmly. You've got courage. Not many would have survived what you did yesterday. His words touched something inside her, a spark of strength she'd thought extinguished. Before she could respond, he stood and began packing up the camp. We should get moving, he said. Storm's coming in from the west. They rode in silence for the first hour, Katherine once again seated in front of Flynn. The sky darkened ominously ahead of them, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. We won't make Silver Creek before the storm hits, Flynn said close to her ear. There's a line shack about a mile east of here. We'll wait it out there. The line shack turned out to be a small, one-room cabin used by cowboys during cattle drives. It was dusty but sound, with a small stove and a narrow cot. They had barely secured the horses in the attached lean-to when the heavens opened. Rain lashed against the single window as Flynn lit the stove and hung their damp outer garments to dry. The close quarters made Katherine acutely aware of him in a way she hadn't been before. In the small space, his presence seemed larger, more imposing, yet she felt no fear, only a strange fluttering in her stomach whenever their eyes met. Looks like we're stuck here for a while, Flynn said, setting a pot of coffee on the stove. Might as well get comfortable. Katherine perched on the edge of the cot, unsure what to do with herself. Flynn seemed to sense her discomfort. Tell me about Boston, he said, offering her a cup of coffee. I've never been east of the Mississippi. Grateful for the distraction, Katherine began to speak of her childhood home, the cobblestone streets, the harbor filled with ships, the changing of the seasons. Flynn listened attentively, asking occasional questions. When she spoke of her father, her voice caught. He wasn't always as he was at the end, she said softly. Before my mother died, he was different, kinder. The gambling and drinking came later. Grief affects people differently, Flynn said. Some turn inward, some lash out. And some run away to the frontier, Katherine added with a sad smile. What about you? Where is home for you? Flynn was quiet for a long moment. Don't rightly know anymore. I was born in Pennsylvania, but after the war, well, the East didn't feel like home anymore. So you came west. So I came west, he agreed. Been moving ever since. Worked as a ranch hand, Army scout, even tried my hand at mining for a spell. Always moving, Katherine mused, never settling down. Never found a reason to, Flynn said, his eyes meeting hers. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. The storm raged on, trapping them in the small cabin as afternoon turned to evening. Flynn prepared a simple meal from his provisions, and they ate by the light of a single lantern. As the wind howled outside, Katherine found herself relaxing in his company, sharing stories and even laughing occasionally. It's strange, she said as Flynn stoked the stove for the night. Yesterday I was certain I was going to die out there, and now. Flynn prompted when she didn't continue. Katherine shrugged. Now I'm sitting in a line shack during a thunderstorm with a man I barely know, and somehow I feel safer than I have in months. Flynn's expression was unreadable in the dim light. You should get some sleep. Take the cot. I'll make do on the floor. That hardly seems fair, Katherine protested. It's your bedroll. I insist, he said firmly. Katherine reluctantly agreed, settling onto the narrow cot while Flynn arranged his blankets on the floor nearby. As the lantern was extinguished, the darkness seemed to press in around them, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning through the window. Flynn, Katherine whispered into the darkness. What will happen when we reach Silver Creek? There was a long pause. What do you want to happen, Katherine? She had no answer for that. All her plans had ended with escape from Boston. She had never thought beyond that moment, beyond the running. I don't know, she admitted. I don't belong anywhere. In the darkness, she heard Flynn shift, and then his voice came closer than before. Then belong to me, Katherine's breath caught. What? I mean. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Stay in Silver Creek, at least for a while. I've got a small ranch outside of town. Nothing fancy, but there's a cabin. You could have time to figure things out. Why would you do that for me? Katherine asked, her heart racing. Because from the moment I found you, something changed, Flynn said quietly. I've been wandering a long time, Katherine. Maybe we both need to stop running. The honesty in his voice moved her deeply. Here was a man who understood what it meant to be adrift in the world, to have no anchor, and he was offering her not just shelter, but understanding. "I'll think about it," she whispered. Morning brought clear skies and a tension between them that hadn't been there before. Flynn's offer hung in the air, unacknowledged in the light of day. They set out for Silver Creek in silence, the muddy trail slowing their progress. The town appeared on the horizon by early afternoon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road, with scattered homesteads visible in the distance. Katherine felt a flutter of anxiety as they approached. What kind of reception would she receive in this frontier town? Flynn seemed to sense her apprehension. "Silver Creek's a decent place," he said. "Good people for the most part." They rode directly to the marshal's office, where Flynn introduced Katherine to Marshal James Hollister, a gruff but kind-eyed man in his 50s. Katherine recounted the stagecoach attack while Flynn handed over the personal effects he'd recovered. "Terrible business," Hollister said when she'd finished. "We've had reports of a gang working this area. Sounds like the same bunch." He turned to Flynn. "You did right bringing the lady here, Garrett. Miss Langley needs a place to stay," Flynn said. "The boarding house still have rooms available." "Mrs. Peterson always has room for a lady in need," Hollister confirmed. "I'll send one of my deputies to escort you there, Miss Langley." Katherine glanced at Flynn, who nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, Marshal." As she was about to leave with the young deputy, Flynn caught her arm gently. "I need to see to some business," he said, "but I'll call on you this evening if that's acceptable." "Yes," Katherine said, surprising herself with how much she wanted to see him again. "That would be fine." Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was a neat two-story building with lace curtains and a small garden. The landlady herself was a plump, cheerful widow who clucked sympathetically over Katherine's situation. "You poor dear, to think of what you've been through," she exclaimed, showing Katherine to a small but clean room. "And rescued by our Mr. Garrett, no less. He's a good man, though he keeps to himself mostly." "You know him well?" Katherine asked, setting down her meager belongings. "Everyone knows Flynn Garrett," Mrs. Peterson said. "He came here about 5 years ago, bought that little spread west of town. Keeps it running smooth, helps his neighbors when needed, never causes trouble, though I suspect he saw plenty during the war." She paused, studying Katherine. "He's never brought a lady to town before, though." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that. He simply helped me when I was in trouble." Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "Of course, dear. Now let's get you a bath and some fresh clothes. I think my niece left some things that might fit you." Freshly bathed and dressed in a borrowed blue calico dress, Katherine felt almost human again. Mrs. Peterson insisted she eat a hearty meal, then left her to rest. But rest wouldn't come. Katherine's mind was too full of thoughts of Flynn Garrett and his unexpected offer. What was she considering? Staying in this frontier town, accepting help from a man she barely knew. Yet something about Flynn called to her, made her feel understood in a way she never had before. As promised, Flynn called that evening. Katherine found him waiting in Mrs. Peterson's parlor, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the feminine surroundings. He had cleaned up as well, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt under his vest. "Miss Langley," he said, standing as she entered. "Mr. Garrett," she replied formally, aware of Mrs. Peterson hovering nearby. "I thought you might like to see a bit of Silver Creek," he offered, "if you're feeling up to a walk." With Mrs. Peterson's smiling approval, they set out into the early evening. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with businesses, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and various other establishments. People nodded to Flynn as they passed, eyeing Katherine curiously. "Everyone seems to know you," she observed. "Small town," Flynn replied with a slight shrug. "Hard to be anonymous." They walked to the edge of town, where the land opened up to rolling prairie. In the distance, mountains rose against the darkening sky, their peaks still touched by the setting sun. "It's beautiful," Katherine said softly. "It is," Flynn agreed, but when she turned, he was looking at her, not the landscape. Katherine felt her pulse quicken. "Flynn, about what you said last night. I meant it," he said simply. "All of it. You barely know me, I know enough." He took a step closer. I know you're brave and resilient. I know you've been hurt but haven't let it break you. And I know that when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time." Catherine's heart pounded in her chest. "What's that?" Like maybe I've found something worth stopping for. She looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity in his gray eyes. "I don't understand. Why me? Why now?" Flynn was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "After the war, I couldn't settle anywhere. Everything felt wrong somehow. So I kept moving, thinking the next place would be different, but it never was." He gestured toward the open country. "Until I came here, this land spoke to me, made me want to put down roots again, but something was still missing." "And you think I'm that something?" Katherine asked incredulously. "I think," Flynn said slowly, "that when I found you by that overturned stagecoach, I recognized something in you, the same restlessness, the same searching." He took her hand gently. "Maybe we've both been looking for the same thing all along." "And what's that?" she whispered. "Home," he said simply. "Not a place, a feeling, belonging." Tears filled Catherine's eyes. "I don't belong anywhere," she cried, the words bursting from her like a confession. "Not in Boston, not here, not anywhere." Flynn's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Then belong to me forever," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stay here. Give us a chance to find out if what I'm feeling, what I think you're feeling too, is real." Catherine's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. This man, this kind, brave, complicated man, was offering her not just shelter but a future. A chance at happiness she'd thought forever beyond her reach. "It's too fast," she protested weakly. Flynn smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Maybe. But out here, life moves differently. People recognize what matters and hold on to it with both hands. And I matter to you, more than I can explain," he admitted. "I know it doesn't make sense. I've been trying to understand it myself." Katherine looked out at the vast landscape, then back at Flynn. Something inside her, some instinct she didn't fully understand, told her to trust him, to trust this feeling between them. "If I stay," she said carefully, "what happens next?" "You take a room at Mrs. Peterson's for as long as you need. Get to know the town, get to know me, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for you at my ranch." He squeezed her hand. "No expectations, Katherine, just possibilities." The openness of his offer touched her deeply. He wasn't demanding anything, just offering her a choice, perhaps the first real choice she'd had in a very long time. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to stay, at least for a while." The joy that flashed across Flynn's face made her heart skip. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. "For now." The weeks that followed were a revelation to Katherine. Silver Creek, despite its frontier roughness, welcomed her warmly. Mrs. Peterson became a motherly figure, introducing her to the town's small society. Katherine found work assisting the schoolteacher, discovering a talent for education she hadn't known she possessed. And then there was Flynn. True to his word, he never pressed her, never made demands. Instead, he courted her, properly calling at the boarding house, taking her on rides through the countryside, bringing small gifts that showed he was paying attention to her likes and dislikes. They talked for hours, sharing their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Katherine learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his difficult relationship with his father, and the horrors he'd witnessed during the war. In turn, she told him about her privileged upbringing, her mother's early death, and her father's spiral into gambling and debt. With each conversation, each shared confidence, the connection between them deepened. Katherine found herself thinking of him constantly, looking forward to their time together with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. 3 months after her arrival in Silver Creek, Flynn invited her to see his ranch for the first time. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but meticulously maintained: a neat cabin, a sturdy barn, corrals for the horses, and a small herd of cattle grazing on the surrounding grassland. "It's not much," Flynn said as he helped her down from her horse, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It's wonderful," Katherine said sincerely, taking in the peaceful setting. "You've built something real here, Flynn." He showed her around proudly, pointing out recent improvements and future plans. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area and two small bedrooms. Everything was scrupulously clean, if somewhat sparse. "I've been thinking about adding on," Flynn said as they sat on the porch later, watching the sunset. "Maybe a bigger kitchen." "And a proper garden," Katherine smiled, recognizing these additions as concessions to feminine comforts. "It sounds lovely." Flynn took her hand, his expression turning serious. "Katherine, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I meant what I said that first night. I want you to belong here with me. Forever." Her heart raced as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said. "I can't offer you the kind of life you had in Boston. But I can promise to love you, protect you, and build a good life with you." He took a deep breath. "Katherine Langley, will you marry me?" Tears sprang to her eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. This man, who had saved her in more ways than one, was offering her his heart, his home, his future. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Flynn, I will marry you." His face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but quickly deepened with the months of longing behind it. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "I love you, Katherine," Flynn said, his forehead resting against hers. "I think I've loved you since I found you by that overturned wagon." "I love you too," she replied, realizing the truth of it as she spoke the words. "I was so lost before you found me." "We found each other," he corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And neither of us has to be lost again." They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Denver, and Flynn looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit. As they spoke their vows, Katherine marveled at the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The tragedy that had driven her from Boston, the terrible stagecoach attack, the appearance of this strong, silent man who had rescued her in every way possible. That night, as Flynn carried her over the threshold of the cabin, now their home, Katherine felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that she had never experienced before. She wasn't running anymore. She had found her place in the world, and it was here, with this man who looked at her as though she were the greatest treasure he had ever discovered. 5 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Flynn taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Eliza, played at her feet, while the newest addition to their family slept peacefully in her arms. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The herd was larger, the buildings improved, and the garden Katherine had planted flourished in the western sun. They had built a good life together, through hard work, mutual respect, and deep, abiding love. Flynn looked up, catching her eye across the yard. Even now, his smile could make her heart race. He lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on his feet, then walked toward her, his long stride eating up the distance between them. "How are my girls?" he asked, climbing the steps to kiss her softly, then bending to ruffle Eliza's curls. "We're perfect," Katherine replied, leaning into his side as his arm came around her shoulders. "Just watching my handsome men." Flynn gazed down at their sleeping infant daughter, his expression softening. "She looks just like her mama," he said, touching the baby's cheek gently. "Poor child," Katherine teased. Flynn's arm tightened around her. "Beautiful child," he corrected. "Beautiful family." As they stood together, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine thought about the desperate young woman she had been, wounded and alone in the wilderness, convinced she belonged nowhere. "I was so wrong," she said softly. "About what?" Flynn asked. Katherine smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. "That day when you found me, when I said I didn't belong anywhere, I was wrong. I just hadn't found you yet." Flynn's eyes, still the same intense gray that had captivated her from the beginning, were warm with understanding. "And now I know," Katherine said, stretching up to kiss him, "that I've always belonged right here with you, forever."